You may yet walk through Merlin's Isle by oak and ash and thorn. The ancient hills do not forget, and you might wake their wisdom yet. Who knows what wonders might be met on this midsummer morn. So I have taken up the tale.
Thank you for taking up the tale.
Everybody loves Arthur. And I loved Arthur before I was a Christian and after I was a Christian and in between.
Would you tell me a bit about the relationship between Tolkien and Lewis? Because people are fascinated with that. And I think they're fascinated with it because we are starved for true male friendship.
The word intimacy is now a euphemism, right? We've lost the way in which people can become incredibly close.
I think there's a lot of young men in particular who are quite rightly sad about the fact that they feel like they don't belong to a culture.
You only think you don't belong because you don't remember. You've been robbed by the last 2 generations who've just stopped remembering the long stories and the old stories. And in fact, story itself, to be a person is to be precisely in a story. We're on Holy Saturday, culturally, right now. We've had a Good Friday of utter destruction of the sacred and the divine. But Sunday is coming.
Did you come in from England recently?
Yeah, I came in what is today? A week ago on Tuesday.
Okay.
I think I flew in, yeah.
I had Martin on the show, Martin Shaw.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was supposed to have been seeing Martin in Oxford and he couldn't make it, but he and I know each other well.
Yeah.
He's writing the foreword to the 2nd volume of this.
Beautiful.
It's amazing.
Well, this is great. It's a joy. Thank you for taking the effort to be on the show. I've watched your videos from time to time and always love them. And when I told my YouTube people that you'd be on, they were thrilled.
Oh, it's great. Well, I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah. Are you surprised?
Anything that has both the word Pints and Aquinas in it, I'm in.
Yeah.
Because I like both.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad to be here and glad to there's something. Well, we speak in England of a quiet revival. It's English, so it's quiet, but there is something of a recovery. I think there's a deep yearning for mystery and enchantment. There has to be more than just the mere concatenation of sort of dead material rattling about in the cosmos. People aren't going to. That doesn't satisfy you for long. Yeah. And I think that desire, that return takes different forms. And sometimes, people don't realize that's all in the faith. There are deep, deep mysteries to plumb. There are great spiritual heights to climb. But, for a while, at least in England, it felt like Christianity was just like moralizing sermons and fundraising jumble sales, So to recover the mystical tradition, to recover the medieval tradition, I think there's a real desire for it.
Right, and in a way, England was sort of like the epicenter of the new atheism with Dawkins and Hitchens, and so you had those buses, God probably doesn't exist.
But then, those guys are coming out the other end of that now, some of them. And there was always a massive contradiction between the kind of bleak material reductivism of the official New Age stance, but the fact that they kind of still needed to sneak over the divide and borrow language of purpose and beauty and meaning, which their actual science and philosophy couldn't provide. I remember I was once present when Richard Dawkins was being interviewed, and so the interviewer said to him, "Professor Dawkins, what is the meaning of life?" And, without a hair's turn, he said, "The replication of RNA and DNA." But the follow-up question was, "What music would you like at your funeral?" Oh. And he immediately, his face lights up and he says, "Bach's B minor Mass." Oh. So go figure.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? And if you have a reductive account that can't account for the intuition we all have at moments of great beauty, that this is more than material, that it comes from somewhere else, that there's a kind of beckoning.
Yeah.
There was, what it invokes in us, the joy which C.S. Lewis famously called, the yearning for the far off country.
Yeah.
And I think one of the places that the recovery and the revival, and I hope the return to an understanding in which, the world is full of beauty and meaning because there is a God who is himself beauty and meaning, who's made it. I think a lot of that is coming through the arts. It's actually coming through music and poetry and experiences that simply can't be reduced to the firing of neurons and the unwinding of selfish genes. I'm not saying that there aren't, there are synapses firing in both of our brains right now, but what we're talking about is never going to be reduced to brain chemistry.
Right. Yeah.
It manifests itself at a physical level, but it's much more than that.
Well, I'm honored to be able to get to have a pipe with you. Now, I got to, every time I smoke this pipe, I have to apologize.
Yeah,
because it's
that's
ridiculous.
A serious pipe. Yeah, that's.
It's like a man wearing a kilt in America.
Yeah,
you can't just wear it. You have to explain yourself.
Yeah.
So I got this from Ukraine. It's made of pear wood.
Oh wow!
And I got to be honest with you, I don't love a pipe. I want to love a pipe more than cigars.
Yeah.
But I often find that if I have a small pipe like that, my gag reflex kicks in.
Oh, really? Right.
Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah, that's weird. Yeah.
So with a cigar, I can hold it and take it in and out, whereas this I can hold it and for some reason it works well. So that's the story.
You feel these old-fashioned, these really long pipes go back to the day when people say, man, I'm holding fire, I'd better not.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think I need the danger of these shorter ones.
Well, you got a beard.
Is that I can set my beard on fire,
Yeah.
like I've done it before. But I also have some longer church waters, as we call those.
Yeah, that's right. You have some tobacco on you?
I do, yeah. I've just, what have you got?
Well, this is called Firebird.
Oh, that's cool.
But listen, I'm an amateur, so you can tell me about everything.
It's a great name for a start.
Yeah, Russian fairy tales, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this is nice because now this is what we call a flake tobacco.
Okay.
So it's compressed, and you've got to rub it in your fingers.
Yeah.
And then make it into so it's more combustible. And I really like that. That's part of the whole tactile experience. I think the whole point, or one of the points about smoking a pipe, is that in a world where everyone's doom scrolling, we're being distracted, we're abstracting ourselves out, we're trying to cover 15 things at the same time. And you can smoke a cigarette nervously and make all that worse. You don't even know what you're doing with your hands. But a pipe, you're rubbing the tobacco, you're packing the pipe in a certain way, you're lighting it more than once, you're centered, you're doing something bodily, but paradoxically, that actually comes once you're smoking, to opening your mind out, setting it free for conversation.
Beautifully put.
And for me, there's a...
You're tending to something. It's sort of like why people are preferring records to just playing something on Spotify.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is going to carry on. So I know a lot of people, in my world of poetry and loving books and, music and the arts, and who kind of are apocalyptic and terrified about AI because it's going to take it all away from us and there's going to be this fake creativity, but it'll do the real creators out of a job. I don't worry about that at all. I actually think that it's going to be so ubiquitous and so bad. Like the internet is already filling up with AI slop.
We call it slop, don't we? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and also when you get to the point when a video is so completely fakeable that you're never going to know, if you see a video on the internet, you'll never know if it's authentic or not. That is going to put a huge premium on what we're doing right now.
In-person experience, absolutely.
Authentic.
Poetry recitals.
And, poetry recitals, a beautiful book. I mean, one of the things, I like about this, this book that I'm just over here with Rabbit Room is it's a physically beautiful object. And I just want to, I have books that my grandfather gave to my mother and my mother gave to me, and I will
this edition, just for those who are wondering what we're talking about, Galahad and the Grail. Tell us a bit about this, and people should so are they selling this edition?
Yeah, there's that one as well.
This is as good as it gets.
That is as good as it gets. But even this main regular one is a beautiful hardback. It's got a proper ribbon for keeping your place.
The illustrations are
the guy who is doing
world.
These illustrations. Stephen Krotz is just amazing.
For those watching, you'll just have to trust us. There'll be links below. Please pick up Malcolm's book. I read fairy tales to my kids almost every night, and this would be something I cannot wait to read.
So this is, in one way, the kind of fruit of a lifetime's love of these stories. I started with these stories when I was very young. Actually, my mother told them to me without a book in front of her. And when she told them to me, she was not summarizing a kiddie's dumbed down Arthur. She was a medieval historian. She kind of had the sources and she loved them. So the way she told it, it had depth. It had a kind of luminous shimmering that she didn't airbrush out the spiritual and Christian parts of it. And neither did she backtrack on all the tragedies and the hurts and the flaws that. So, I mean, just to give you an example, I can remember it's really vivid. So you got to think I'm about 8 years old, and I think my mum has decided that I'm old enough for this bit of the story. And some people might think maybe I wasn't old enough even then. So she tells me, this just doesn't make it into a lot of modern versions. She tells me the tale of the Dolorous Stroke, as it's called, which is where this rash knight, Balin, who's kind of on a vendetta. He's already been thrown out of Arthur's court for a bit of violence in the midst of table fellowship so he's trying to achieve some quest to redeem himself. But he finds this castle where didn't use, just like, I've been this way before, there was no castle, and of course he doesn't know it's the Grail castle, but he thinks the knight he's pursuing might be there. So he goes in, the Fisher King is there, there's this beautiful feast, they're all told to put their swords at the door, and then he sees the guy he's been pursuing, and he's concealed a dagger, and he comes up and stabs him, the dagger breaks, and he's broken the table fellowship again. He's sinned against prime courtesy and hospitality. So the king, starts pursuing, and my mum and he runs out into the castle. He's going up stair after stair, and in castles you expect to find swords or spears on the wall or shields or something, and he's looking everywhere. He's unarmed now. Can't find anything, so he keeps going. And my mother was telling me this, and I realized now it's all in memory, that as he gets deeper into the castle, there's a kind of change in the atmosphere. There's almost like a kind of high ringing, singing in his ears. He seems to hear angelic voices. Then he begins to discern the words, man of sin, come no further. Man of blood, stay back. But he's being pursued. And then, of course, he crosses the threshold into the holiest of places, because in this castle is the chapel of the Grail. And the Holy Grail is there. And he comes in, and again, fall down on your face, this place where you are standing is holy ground. I heard that phrase from my mother's lips in an Arthur story before I heard it in scripture when the Lord speaks to Moses from the burning bush. But this is a burning bush. So he looks, he sees the Grail, this is the very Eucharistic presence of Christ, shining. And above it, because this is where the hallows are, is a spear from which 3 drops of blood are continually falling. And my mum says, Balin didn't know this, but this is the spear that pierced Christ's heart, brought to our islands. And again, the voices tell him to stand back. And then he does the worst thing. I'll say, oh, Mum, he rushes forward. He seizes this spear, this holy thing, and turns it around and sacrilegiously uses it to wound the king. The fishes is where the Fisher King gets his wound. And of course, in the minute the king receives the wound, the whole part of the castle falls down, this complete darkness. And he and the king he is wounded, and the Grail and the spear are buried alive. And it's like being in the sepulchre. And of course, it's 3 days and 3 nights. And on the 3rd day, the stones move, and Merlin has moved them, and he comes up. And then Merlin says to Balin, you have dealt the Dolorous Stroke. And because the king and the land are one, in wounding the king, you have laid the land waste for 3 counties wide. The fish die in the streams, the crops fail, the cows can't calve, everything is wasted and barren because you've done this. And he has to ride 3 days with everybody coming to the door and curse. At this point, I have to stop my mum. I say, Mum, like, how could that even be? Like, he didn't even know what it was, although he'd had plenty of warning, And how could what one person did lay so many lives and so much land to waste? That doesn't seem right, Mum. And then she kind of looked at me and said, well, I'm telling you this story because you need to know that you live in a world as perilous as that. And this is like 1965. And we've had the Cuban Missile Crisis not long ago. There's the fear of a nuclear winter. Then she tells me how, I'm here because my parents love each other, but they take a risk bringing a child into such a world. And they have to take that risk in hope. And, I'm devastated, by all this. But my mum, unlike T.S. Eliot, my mum did not leave me in the wasteland. So she said the only thing that made Balin's shame and guilt bearable as he rides out through this devastation is that Merlin kind of whispers a word of hope to him and says, one day the good night will come, the Grail night will come, and he will win through the wasteland and come to the Grail castle, and he will achieve the Grail. And then with the same spear that wounded the king will be healed. Mm-hmm. And when the king is healed, the land will be healed. And I said, who's that, Mum? And that's Galahad. And, I was waiting for the stories of the coming of Galahad, And when I was out as a kid, that playing Knights of the Round Table, like, I didn't play it being Lancelot because, like, I was never going to be picked for the school football team. Like, I was not the captain of the school Lancelot guy. But I figured it could be that guy Galahad. Galahad, who has this, this spiritual life, this awareness of Christ, this desire to heal, this sense of restoring. I mean, because I was saying, my mum would tell me about, and she said, the spear that pierced Christ's heart, the spear of Longinus, why is that so significant? She says, well, look, in all our history since Cain slew Abel, there's been a great chain of violence and hurting, and every act of violence is met with another act of violence back, and the pain and the blood just deepens, and finally all that violence reaches Christ, the Son of God. And he is the one person who, as the spear pierces his heart, turns it around and offers love and forgiveness. I mean, in a way, that should have been the last time a spear ever pierced a human heart. But, we've carried on with our wars. That's the way we are as fallen people. But at least that spear should have been sacred. So to turn the sacred and use it for this internecine violence was the kind of great sacrilege. But even the greatest sacrilege, God has an answer for it, and so, the Grail Knight comes, and this, and I was only years later I get to, by his stripes we are healed, and the realization of this paradox that well, I mean, to me, the priest poet George Herbert, shows all of that is in the love of God. I love his best lines on the sacrament ever, I think, which is, love is that liquor sweet and most divine, which my God feels as blood, but I as wine. Yeah.
So I am really excited to tell you that I have partnered with Theotokos Rosaries. These are, without a doubt, the most beautiful rosaries I have ever seen in my life. Theotokos Rosaries sent me one maybe about a year ago or so, and I remember being absolutely blown away. You probably heard me talking about it. I've sent one to my mom and dad and uncle. I give them to some of the guests that we have, and everyone who receives one is blown away. These are just a total different caliber. And when you think about the kind of money we're willing to spend on a phone, it's like, sure, you can pray a rosary on your fingers or on a string rosary, and it would work just the same, obviously. But if you're looking for a beautiful rosary that's more of also like an heirloom, something that you could have for life, check this out. Go to dailywire.com/shop and pick up one of these. This is more of the masculine one. This one they based on St. Peter's Basilica. So it has real stone beads and Italian olive wood. This one is inspired by Notre Dame in Lyon, France. So you might want to, again, pick this up. It'd be a beautiful ordination gift, a gift for those who are getting married, maybe Father's Day, Mother's Day. Like, honestly, a beautiful gift. I remember what moved me so much is when I sent this to I won't say who because I don't want to call them out, but a family member who doesn't actually pray the rosary. They started praying the rosary. And I think it's honestly because it's so beautiful and so sacred looking. So again, go to dailywire.com/shop to pick one up today. And thank you to Theotokos Rosaries for partnering with us.
So all of that was to come. But when I was a student in the 70s at Cambridge and reading this stuff, I realized how close my mum was to the actual Mallory. She was kind of quoting it. So it all comes back to me. But now the wasteland means something more because I'm thinking about ecological disaster. I'm thinking about, and again, both the acknowledgement that we did this and we do this because we're sinners, because we're out of line with God. So there's another layer of the wasteland. Then later when I'm confronting what I feel is the terrible disenchantment of the world and the effects of bad philosophy in the 17th and 18th century and the split between the spiritual and the material and Cartesian dualism, I'm realizing that's another kind of wasteland which also needs to be healed. But when I began to think I want to write this as an epic, it was only then that I realized that this I read all the scholarship that said, oh, all the king and the dying king and the wounded king and the land is wasted. And it's all, this is pre-Christian, what they call a fertility rituals and myths and,
not to be trusted.
The book, all this stuff. And well, I mean, first of all, you've got to be careful with the word pre-Christian if you're a fully Trinitarian Christian, because in the beginning was the Word and all things were made through in him. There is the undergirding presence of the Logos everywhere before he does this incredibly gracious thing and makes himself known to us, in Jesus. But when I thought about this, I realized all these stories, I'm sure there is a pre-Christian element in there, but the point is the Arthur stories bring it to Christ. This isn't some random Celtic cauldron of generation or, the spear of Bronn. Mm-hmm. Now, is that illegitimate? Did they take some pagan thing and give it just a Christian gloss? I don't think so. So when I was looking back at, obviously if you're going to write an English epic, you kind of have to get it okay with Milton, Mm-hmm. So, you think Paradise Lost, right? Mm-hmm. Plot spoiler, but, it's a 12-book epic on 2 short chapters in Genesis. He doesn't even get to the moment where Eve reaches for the fruit till book 9. But when he describes this colossal cosmic turning point, this moment of our fall, so saying in evil hour, Eve's hand, with rash hand she reached, he doesn't say, so this particular individual woman did a private peccadillo and it'll be fine with therapy. She didn't. The first thing that Milton says at the moment when humankind falls is this. He says, earth felt the wound, and nature, sighing out through all her works, gave sign that all was lost. And he's riffing on the line in Genesis, cursed shall be the ground because of you. I thought, wait a minute, this wasteland story, Adam and Eve are the king and queen, and there's we are a royal priesthood. These stories about kings are always a story about you, mm-hmm. And every man is the Adam of his own soul. Mm-hmm. So this story of how when we go wrong, the world goes wrong with us. And then as you trace it out, you think it's all in Romans. I mean, the whole creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. And again, creation was subjected to futility, but in hope. And in the coming of Christ and in the resurrection and in our being made new is the beginning of a new creation. So this story, whether it was pagan in so-called pagan in origin or not, of the unhealable wound, the fall, the wasteland, and the recovery, and the turning of the recovery being through the blood of Jesus Christ in sacrament. That's what the Grail is, mm-hmm. And the blood that falls into the thigh of the wounded king that heals him and then heals the land. It's the blood of Christ. It's not, So what I feel is going on there, and I think the Arthurian stories just do this beautifully, is it's kind of baptizing the imagination of our pre-Christian ancestors. It's taking some of their deepest stories and showing that the thing that really makes sense of those stories mm-hmm. is the coming of Christ. It's a bit like Paul, in Athens, where he says, men of Athens, I see you're religious in all. As I observed the objects of your worship, I saw this statue to an unknown God. Him whom you worship as unknown, him I preach, and so there's just layer on layer.
Beautiful.
But it's not just like a flat Disney cartoon or a kind of Hollywood blockbuster where people are just knocking each other off horses for 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like seeing people knock each other off horses.
Don't get me wrong. I want to get back to that, but before we do, let's talk about tobacco. All right. Everybody wants to know, what is your favorite tobacco?
Okay, so I've got 2 if I'm allowed to, because it depends where I am.
Have as many as you wish.
If I'm upstairs in my study in the house, it needs to be an aromatic. My wife will tolerate an aromatic.
Exactly the same as my wife.
So I tend to, there's an English one, there's one called Kendal Black Cherry.
That smells lovely.
So this is not the one I brought from home. No. It's one I got that's pretty similar here. This, amazingly, is called Grand Mariner. Mm-hmm. I bought it in Alexandria in Virginia.
But sorry, the black cherry one. What's it called?
It's called Kendal Black Cherry.
Kendal Black Cherry, right?
And it's the one I smoke indoors. But I smoke Peterson pipes, and I love some of their tobacco blends. So there's there's a flake tobacco like that, but except instead of being in little long flakes, it's in little tiny coins.
Yeah. Why?
And
Is there any
so originally when they made
benefit
that
to that,
tobacco, the tobacco is called Deluxe Navy Rolls.
Yeah.
Right? It just smells like baking bread, actually.
Yeah.
So Peterson. So what they did was when the British Navy was a thing, and well, it still is a thing, but when they were sailing out for months, and you got your tot of rum, but you also had got tobacco, and they compressed the tobacco into long tubes, like thin rolls, literally.
Yeah.
And then they would slice off those, and they become coins. So that's still done. It's still pressed that way, and you buy the tin, and it's got these like round coins or lozenges of curled tobacco, and you just, like a couple of those, you break up in your hands and you fill your pipe.
Right.
But I only smoke.
That's the aromatic.
The aromatic is the Kendall Black Cherry.
Yeah.
So
but the one
the Deluxe Navy Rolls is more full on.
Is that
English.
the brand? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's Peterson who make it, but so it used to be Dunhill, and then they went.
Do you prefer an English blend to an aromatic?
Yeah, I actually like I like the aromatic, but if I want a real pipe, a real strong bowlful that's going to wake me up and accompany me in my writing.
Yeah.
The kind of thing where, like C.S. Lewis in his preface to St. Athanasius on the Incarnation. It's a great book, but great preface. He talks about the unexpected joy that comes in reading hard theology and just getting your mind there.
Yep.
And he says, when you're going through a bit of tough theology with a pipe clenched beneath your teeth and a pencil in your hand, and suddenly the Spirit sings as you're doing it. So I need stronger tobacco for that, but I smoke that down in my hut, my writing hut at the bottom of the garden, which is called it's called the Temple of Peace. More in hope than expectation. But and I have some other more robust blends that got Latakia and Perique, and so the Cavendishes and the Virginias are the milder end.
Okay,
and then you can get these much stronger flavored. You don't want too much of them. You make your own mixture, your kind of mélange, as the French call it. And
may I borrow your lighter?
Yeah. It's
and then why?
I have some really nice old lighters, but I never travel with them because you can randomly have your lighters taken off you. So I don't want to lose a good one, so I travel with. I'll need to do mine again. But this lighting and relighting is a whole part of the experience. Tolkien apparently was always constantly relighting his pipes, and thinking in between, and
Yeah, for some reason when I smoke the Church Warden, I find I have to relight it less, and I don't know why that is.
Anyway, so this, I got this really nice temper while I was here. It's like
beautiful
horn and wood. So I sometimes name pipes and tempers, and this one's called Stormcrow. And the reason why is I've just seen the prelude, the forward to the next volume, which Martin Shaw, my friend, has written. And I first met with Martin on the wings of a massive storm that was sweeping through, and it blew out all the lights, and we had like 3 days in his cottage by candlelight.
Come on.
With nothing but single molten fairy.
Come on. Yes.
Anyway, so in the preface he says that because of that, he and his friends all call me Stormcrow.
May is the month we honor the Blessed Virgin Mary. And what better way to draw close to her Son than through prayer? If you're like most people, sometimes you need a little help making that happen. That's where our sponsor Hallow has seriously changed the game. Whether you've got 5 minutes on the commute or a quiet hour in the evening, Hallow helps you slow down and really pray with guided rosaries, reflections, and meditations from folks who actually make prayer feel accessible, not complicated. I've used Hallow for years now. We use it sometimes to listen to the Holy Rosary, or I'll play some sleep stories, Bible sleep stories for the kids at night who they really enjoy it. This month on Hallow, you can join thousands around the world praying the Marian consecration with daily reflections and beautiful audio guided by voices you'll know and love. So if you've been meaning to reconnect with God, don't wait. Download Hallow right now. It's free to start, and honestly, I've had people say to me that it's one of the best tools they've encountered that help them stay consistently on a prayer routine. So visit hallow.com/Matt Fradd to get 3 months free. Let's make this May a month of grace, peace, and genuine prayer. Again, that's hallow.com/Matt Fradd for 3 months free. Brothers, summer's fast approaching, a season we all need for rest and a bit of breathing room. But if we're honest, it's also a time when faith can quietly take the back seat. That's why I'm really excited about what Exodus 90 is doing with the Kings of Summer Challenge. It's a beautiful invitation for men to slow down, pray, and reflect on Christ's kingship over our lives and the astonishing truth that through baptism, we actually share in that kingship ourselves. This year's theme is The Return of the King, led by one of my favorite people in the whole world, Joseph Pearce. If you've ever heard Joseph speak or read his work, you know how deeply he ties Tolkien's universe to the heart of our faith. I've had him on the show a couple of times now to talk about Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, and he is truly a knowledgeable and wise man. Through the challenge, we'll journey not just through the biblical books of kings, but through Tolkien's world itself, seeing how the kingship of Christ calls us to order, joy, and renewed purpose. So if you're longing for a summer that's deeper, more centered on Christ and full of meaning, this is for you. Join the Exodus 90 Brotherhood today and sign up for the Kings of Summer Challenge starting May 25th. Download the Exodus 90 app to start your 14-day free trial or visit exodus90.com/Matt to learn more. That's exodus90.com/Matt. Download the app today and become the man God created you to be.
So did you say you name your Tampa?
I named the Tampa Stormcry.
Could you name this pipe for me?
Well, there we are. Well, I think I would call that pipe Thorin.
Thorin, all right.
I think it would be Thorin Oakenshield style of pipe. And you'd be smoking long-bottom leaf in it.
Okay. Deal. Done.
Or
Thank
Southern
you.
Star. Yeah.
And
so the whole pipeweed thing, I started wanting to smoke a pipe when I was like 17 or 18 on reading The Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And I've been smoking pipes ever since. And I remember when I thought, I've got to tell my mum I'm smoking. She'll be really cross with me. My parents didn't smoke. So I told her I was smoking a pipe, and she said, "Oh, a pipe, that's all right."
Your mum sounds terrific.
And then she remembered that when she was a little girl, when her dad smoked a pipe, my grandfather, whom I never met, and he only lit the pipe when the day's work was done, and he was relaxed and ready, and they knew it would be story time. And he had
come on.
old-fashioned TV.
Yes.
And so they loved it. And then my uncle and my mother would get on the arms of the chair, and he would read to them and tell them stories while smoking a pipe. So my mum has loved pipe smoke ever since, and she's totally fine with her son smoking a pipe.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said about your wife, because I'll smoke a pipe in our living room while reading to the kids. My wife loves the aromatic. She sees it more like incense than anything else, but she does not like the smell of cigar.
Yeah. Cigar, that's just a fact. I smoke cigars. I like cigars as well, but I smoke them down in my hut. Because they don't have a great room note, as they say.
But that does. Whatever you're smoking
this
now,
does, yeah.
This
is an aromatic that I bought in Virginia, and it's called Grand Mariner.
Yeah.
Which I guess is a play on Grand Marnier.
Okay.
But also on Ancient Mariner. And I'm a big Coleridge fan, and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a key text for
And why do you like? Do you want some Lagavulin?
I'd love some, thank you.
And why do you like Peterson's?
Well, one of the earliest pipes I bought was a small little Peterson system. When I went to Ireland when I was 19, I had a long, slow ramble round Ireland. And so obviously Peterson's an Irish make. But also, they had a literary ring for me because in those days, this was before I returned to Christian faith, and I was a kind of weird mixture of existentialism and like little bits of Zen that I'd picked up or whatever. But Samuel Beckett was a really important writer for me, and I kind of knew Waiting for Godot by heart practically.
Yep.
And there's a great bit where a character called Pozzo is smoking a pipe, and then in the second act he loses it. And he says, "A genuine Cap'n Peterson," he says. So like I knew that.
Yeah.
And I was very satisfied. When I was an undergraduate in Cambridge, I did a bit of theatre and drama. I was studying English literature. So the European Theatre Group put on a production of Waiting for Godot, in which I played Lucky, the poor suffering servant but they needed a pipe. And I still had that Peterson I'd bought in Ireland, and I produced it. And so the pipe that Pozzo in Beckett had inspired me to buy was then actually smoked by that very pipe, smoked by the character on stage.
How many pipes do you own, roughly?
Oh,
Have a guess.
Yeah, I would say probably 30 at least, I would have thought.
Yeah, it's becoming a problem for me too, even though pipes aren't what I predominantly smoke.
Well, I tend to, now I'll only buy a pipe if it's to celebrate some special occasion.
That's nice, yeah.
When I went for the first time as a scholar in residence at the Kilns in Oxford, which is C.S. Lewis's house, I went down to the same pipe shop that Lewis and Tolkien visited in Oxford, and I bought a C.S. Lewis pipe.
So. Yeah.
And later, when I did a Tolkien lecture, I bought a Tolkien pipe, which was a churchwarden. So I have, a lot of the pipes.
My dear friend Jimmy Aiken, who loves a good pipe, says there's two kinds of pipe smokers. There's those who just stick it in their craw and that's it. And then there are fiddlers.
Yeah.
They're always and that's me, I think. I'm always fiddling. And,
yeah, it gives you something to do with your hands. Yeah.
But it is nice. It's more of a contemplative activity, I find.
Yeah. No, it is.
When I'm on my own,
it's... I wrote a poem once called "Smoke Rings from My Pipe."
I remember you reading it on one of your videos.
And,
it was lovely.
I leave the world with all its hopeless hype, its pressures and its ever-ringing till. Whingers and whiners, each with their own gripe. I pack them in tobacco leaves until they're blown away and smoke rings from my pipe. Then I'm free. Then at last my real work has begun, my chance to chant, to exercise the skill of summoning the muses. So I associate pipe smoking with the calm that comes before writing poetry.
That's beautiful.
Now,
funny,
Sláinte. So Lagavulin I love Isla malts.
Okay,
I spent
good.
When I was getting this book to the point where I thought, okay, it's deliverable. But it's meant to be read out loud.
Is water here too.
It's an epic.
In this one is water in case you need.
So my friends
and
I went to the island of Isla.
Yeah.
And the deal was that we would go around the distilleries in the day, and including to Lagavulin.
Come on.
And then in the evening, I would read them evening by evening, the whole poem.
This particular
poem.
one.
So anyway, well, as you know, the Isla malts they got this slight smokiness and peatiness, and I like some smoke with my smoke. So,
it tastes like I've always said it tastes like campfire and seawater.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of there's a bit of Atlantic seaweed kind of.
But then I'll have other peaty scotches that feel artificial, even if they aren't. It just feels too much.
No, this one, because this is 16, it's had a chance to mature and smooth. Yeah. Mind you, I wasn't very mature when I was 16, but that's the way it was.
What do you say? I'm sure you have encounter Christians who might say, look, your body's a temple of the Holy Spirit. You shouldn't be smoking bloody tobacco.
Well, I think the first thing I'd say, just on the health front, is that pipes and cigars are in a different category from cigarettes because you don't inhale. So you're not taking this stuff down into your lungs. You're tasting it on the tongue. You're breathing it out. So and I think you've got to balance the benefits. So,
well, the other thing, if I might just interject, a Marlboro cigarette has about 14 ingredients.
Yeah.
You smoke a premium cigar, or if you're using premium leaf, you've got one ingredient, namely leaf. Yeah.
Exactly. And so one of the problems about that we have a tendency now, which is part of the whole problem of our culture, to medicalize everything, to see ourselves as maximize the ideal input and output and all that stuff, and through just as if
productivity,
and that completely misses most of what it is to be human. And one of the things that it is to be human is to belong to a culture and a story and a tradition which you receive and carry on. So I was conscious that, my two of my favorite authors, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, not only smoked pipes, but smoked pipes together and discussed and read their books while smoking pipes. Then I go back, another of my predecessors in the whole Arthurian venture, Alfred Lord Tennyson, inveterate pipe smoker, and so there's a tradition, just like there's a tradition with pubs and pints or, single malts. Yeah. You're no longer an isolated individual. You're not doing something for an immediate sensory hit. Of course, there is a sensory hit, but you're interpreting that and celebrating it because the pipe is a kind of sign of belonging to a long tradition of gentle, meditative, parlour side or pub side or fireside, mellowed thoughtful conversation. That's what's going on, when you're like, well, it's kind of what we're doing now.
Yeah. And there's a lot of young men in particular who are quite rightly sad about the fact that they feel like they don't belong to a culture.
Yeah.
They want to. What's your advice to them?
Well, I think I'd want to say you only think you don't belong because you don't remember. And you don't remember because you've been robbed by the last 2 generations who've just stopped remembering the long stories and the old stories. And in fact, story itself, I remember when I first heard the term postmodern, right? And I rejoiced because I thought, oh, thank God modernism is over. We can get back to the long, And then I discovered, actually, no, this is kind of hypermodernism. And the thing that the thing that postmodernism was most supposed to critique or do away with was the idea of what they call the meta-narrative.
Yeah.
So the big overarching story that makes sense of life that we're in. They say, no, there isn't. Then there's a suspicion of any kind of narrative and the death of the author. And then the suspicion is that that narrative is about power.
And then the meta-narrative is that there is no meta-narrative, for which they didn't even argue.
Yeah, exactly.
Have to assume it, like Nietzsche did.
But so the people who are behind this, ultimately are the 3, as it were, masters of suspicion. So Nietzsche, Marx, and Freud. And we then get what people call the hermeneutics of suspicion. So you think that what you see is not what you get. You have to unmask it, and there's something sinister behind it. And the sinister thing behind it is power and the powerful against the oppressed. Now, there's an element of truth that some narratives have been set up to control others. Any good thing can be abused, but because narrative and storytelling and even myth-making can be abused, and you can think of the kind of hideous exploitation of myth, say, in the Nazis, you want to resist that. But the fact that there are false narratives doesn't mean that there isn't a true narrative.
Any more than the existence of monopoly money doesn't disprove real money.
Exactly. In fact, the analogy of currency is very apposite here. Words can be devalued and they can be revalued, and there can be a kind of inflation, and then there can be, and it's the advertisers and the politicians who are causing verbal inflation, and words are, sounding bigger and bigger and meaning less and less.
Yes. This
so
is Lewis's critique of how we use the word gentleman.
Yeah. Poets have to come back in and restore and redeem that. So there's a brilliant, anyway, but the really interesting thing is some of the philosophers and philosophers of language who were most associated with that dismantling of narrative, that uber suspicion, which of course reduces you. If you're not part of a story, what are you? If you don't remember anything, you are literally dismembered. Your fragments of personality, your little bits competing. And then, eventually it all goes down to tiny little reels and shorts, which you endlessly scroll through, but have no connection with each other. But to be a person is to be precisely in a story, and its narrative is what gives coherence and meaning to events. Otherwise, they're just random. It's just like one damn thing after another. Now, these philosophers of the sort of, Derrida, Foucault, who took all this stuff away from us, of course, then turned it on themselves and began to suspect even whether language was real, whether we don't all just, we're in our isolated skulls and it's my truth versus your truth, and I've no idea what you make of the thing I try to mean to you. So at one point, George Steiner, who was part of this in a book called After Babel, described communication, so-called, and the use of language. He said, we're like walled cities, each entirely enclosed in the concavity of our own skulls. And when we think we're talking, what we're doing is lobbing verbal grenades over the barricades, and we hear the dull sound of them going off, and we've no idea what damage we're doing. But the point is, if you really believe that, why do you write a 300-page book about it? You're using... Anyway, I only say this because George Steiner and others are now coming out the other end of this. It's like, if the fool persists in his folly, he will be wise. So one of the most significant books for this world, I'm a Cambridge academic, so I do the literary critical theory thing as well, and it's not that my Arthurian stuff is my guilty pleasure. It's actually the way out of the wasteland. Anyway, Steiner suddenly wrote this bombshell book. It was back in the end of the 80s, and it's called Real Presences. And basically, he asks the question, is there anything in what we say? And the first paragraph is like a summary of all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's saying, we mistake language, this is early Wittgenstein, we mistake language for reality because we can say a sentence with the word God in it. We think there's a God, but it's just a verbal construct. It's just our constructed truth. It's just like we speak of sunset, even though we know perfectly well that the sun doesn't set or rise, but the earth turns. We don't talk of earth turn. So these are sort of ghosts in the machine and skeletons in the kind of linguistic closet. So you get this for I nearly gave up on the book, right? I'm reading these 2 paragraphs. I thought, oh, come on, why are you even writing? And then the 3rd paragraph begins, the purpose of this essay is to argue the reverse. And he says, I've tried to completely deconstruct language and everything that language has to say, and I find meaning persists in spite of all. Where does that come from? And then he says, he uses exactly the analogy. He says, our language is current. It really does work. In spite of all our theories, we really do communicate. Cor ad cor loquitur, as Newman says, heart speaketh unto heart. And he says, how is that? And he says there must be some actual transcendent meaning. And he refers to this meaning as someone who underwrites all the verbal checks we pass to each other.
Very good.
There is a bank of meaning.
Yep.
And basically he ends up rediscovering the theology of the Logos. And, he's a great Jewish intellectual. I mean, he's died now, part of that sort of secularized Jewish intellectual fervor, of which there are so many brilliant examples amongst that gifted people, but often kind of fending off the God thing because it's such a big... And eventually he just kind of, out of his linguistic things, he ends up coming up with not only a theology of transcendence, but borrowing the language of incarnation and passion. For him, the incarnation of the word is right at the core of the meaning of language. And he says, he says culturally, he says, it's amazing, and I think it's really prophetic, talking about the whole world from death of God, deconstruction, obviously death of God's a Nietzschean phrase, that he says, do you know where we are? We're on Holy Saturday, culturally right now. We've had a Good Friday of utter destruction of the sacred and the divine, but Sunday is coming.
And are you hopeful that this sort of revival towards Christianity?
Yeah, I am absolutely hopeful.
Part of that?
Yeah. Well, I'm hopeful. We may not have hopes in this world, but we know. I'm hopeful because this has happened before many times culturally. And the first place it happened, as Steiner actually rightly suggests, was at Golgotha.
Yeah.
Like we've nailed that. We've buried that. That's not going to happen again. That's
God
done.
is dead.
God is dead. Oh no! Wait a minute. Empty tomb.
He's bloody back again.
He's bloody back again. And in fact, and the man who gave him the tomb, in my legends and stories, brings all the holy things to England of all places, like the furthest reach of empire. But this is 18th century. They were people like Voltaire were happily saying like, oh, that's over. We've progressed, we've moved on. What happens at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century? Massive Christian revival, particularly in the British Isles, and a twin, like it's a kind of God's pincer movement, because on the one hand, you've got Wesley and the whole Methodist revival and the evangelical revivals of the Clapham sect. And on the other hand, you've got the Oxford movement. You've got, people like Pusey and Newman and, Manning. I mean, and Newman and Manning, of course, become Roman Catholics, but there's a whole bunch of people who say, oh, wait, the thing that's missing here is sacrament. We've totally split the spiritual and the material. But here's a beautiful tradition that speaks of these things as a mystery, which says the spiritual has the humility to become material on our behalf. And that changes the nature of matter forever.
I saw a great meme. It's a kid standing on a couple of books looking at a library, and he says, God exists. And then the next is a man standing on several books, and he says, God does not exist. He's looking just above the bookshelf. And there's a third guy who's got so many books that he's now looking at the universe, and he says, oh shit, it's God again.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah, so, I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, to borrow a phrase of Aquinas, since we're having pints with Aquinas, I mean, God is the ground of all being.
Yeah.
So the ground of all being is not going to go away. And he doesn't need to employ kind of double glazing salesmen and insurance agents to get his word out there. It's always going to be there. He is the root and ground of being. And also, all the atheist arguments are old. I've been talking about Aquinas again. So when I decided I was going to specialize in medieval literature, I thought I've got to read the guys. I read Augustine. So I had Aquinas' Summa Contra Gentiles, which is, I'm a Gentile, speak to me.
Yep.
So you may remember that.
Oh.
That book more or less begins with, is there a God?
Yeah.
It would seem not for the following 10 reasons.
Right.
And he gives you 10 really, and I thought, blimey, I'm an atheist.
How's he going to get out of this?
I'm an atheist and I've only thought of 5 of these.
Yeah.
So he really, and that's totally disarming.
Yeah.
Because the modern narrative is people only believe, like Christianity is for dummies.
Yeah.
You're not going to say that after reading Aquinas.
No.
So the assumption I had was that now we'd seen science and now we understood, more about the mechanics of the universe. We didn't need that stuff. That's the childhood of the world,
Does he give 10 arguments? I mean, in the Summa Theologia, he gives 2. I didn't realize it was 10
there's
in
a
the
bunch of
Contra
them.
Gentiles.
He goes through why you shouldn't believe. And then, in the famous phrase that comes, he says, sed contra.
That's right.
On the other hand.
Said bloody contra.
Yeah. And
I look this up. No.
I'm remembering this from a way back, so I hope, but,
I won't fact check you in real time. I just want to see what he says.
But anyway, the point is just the fact that he then sets it out in terms of argument.
Yeah.
And then, so I get to the Summa Theologia, and then there's this distinction between faith and knowledge and the proper relationship between faith and knowledge. And faith isn't plugging a gap in knowledge, but it's a foundation and ground of knowledge.
Right.
And then that's developed later it's developed before Aquinas by Anselm, who says theology is fides querens intellectum, it's faith-seeking. But earlier, Augustine had said, I don't understand in order to believe. Mm-hmm. I believe in order to understand. Mm-hmm. And anybody who says, just to say that other people exist is an act of faith.
Right.
Because you only have the evidence of your interior monologue, your interior mind about it. Maybe you're just making it up.
Yep.
Yeah. To believe that there's a truth beyond yourself, to exercise reason.
That's very good. That's a good analogy, right? Because I could be a solipsist and just assume you don't. And then life's pretty bloody confusing.
And I remember my dad explaining to me what solipsism was. So solipsism.
All right. Well, I went through a bout of that as a teenager. But as soon as you assume, okay, what if I'll act as if there are other people? Yeah. I'll believe. And now all of a sudden I understand what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the question about belief is not whether you're going to believe or not, because everybody's going to believe something is, because you've got to believe that logic actually works and is logical before you use logic, analytic reason. So there's something a priori that you believe. The question is not whether you're going to believe, it's what, and on what grounds, and on what grounds are you going to assess whether you were right to have put your faith there. So the question really about the Christian faith is whether it makes more sense of the world as we actually live it than the atheist alternatives. Yeah. And if the atheist alternatives are telling you have no real personhood, no real soul, you're just the unwinding of an enzyme and the self-bubbling.
Yep.
How is it that you actually experience choice? And the peril of choice, and you experience responsibility, and you experience beauty, and your experience of beauty is essentially transcendent rather than immanent. You kind of have a sense. I mean, it's all there. Yeah. I mean, even if you go back to, let's say, like a Shakespeare sonnet, so famously, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, right? Executive summary, shall I compare thee to the summer's day? No, you're way better.
Yeah.
So he's going through what's the problem with the summer is full of promise, but it's problematic. So you remember, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Now here's the problem with summer. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. It's temporal, it flies, it promises, and it goes away. And winter comes, says, your lease is up, your time is up, it's gone. What's the next line? He says, but thy eternal summer shall not fade. Now, eternal summer is a contradiction in terms, or better still, a paradox. There's something in spring or something that says there's more of this. It doesn't have to fly away. This is coming, this temporal, fleeting thing that you have to love and it leaves you. He's always telling you that there's something that won't fade, that there's something, and in this case, in the experience of human love, paradoxically, even as the moment flies, I think there's something permanent, there's something eternal. Thy eternal summer shall not fade. And we've been left with the stories, but they're telling us there's no eternity. There's an English folk songwriter called Alan Franks, who's got a great line. And in one of his songs, he says, "They give us the wings, then dismantle the sky." I think what's returning is precisely the sense of the eternal coming through the temporal, and the material temporal accounts can't account for it. It's a real experience for millions of people, and they don't have a philosophy that makes sense.
Sitting here with a fella. I'm going to switch to the cigar. You see how quickly I did that?
Yeah.
I was sitting with a fella here yesterday, Dr. J. Budziszewski, who was a Nietzschean nihilist. He said more nihilist than Nietzsche. He came to Christ. He's a Catholic in Austin. What was he saying? Golly. Forgive me. I'm sure there was a point there, but I bloody lost it.
That's right. Oh, I like that little clippy sound of a cigar clipper, you know.
Well, that's the ritual.
It's exactly.
The ritual's lovely. Okay, here's what he said. It just came back to me. He said that he ripped up his mind. That's how he put it. Like he ripped up his mind with nihilism.
Yeah.
And we're living in a time where people are longing for culture. They're longing to be reconnected to the story.
Yeah, exactly.
But they may, like my friends say, they've ripped up their mind. How do we put the mind back together?
Well, let's just look. We do so by remembering the things we've forgotten. And we just need to think for a moment about the etymology of the word remember. To remember is to remember, to take what has been split apart and ripped apart and severed and bring it back together again into one whole. And we can only, if we've been, as it were, culturally and psychologically dismembered by the kind of trashy philosophies we inherited, then we need to remember deeper ones and older ones. And this is the great gift of Christianity. You know, we've been around for a while. And there's a reason for that, because we are a story being told by God himself. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. I noticed in the last 10 years of my chaplaincy in Cambridge that whereas we were all being told, you know, in theological college that we should be down with the kids and like, you know, two guys and a guitar in a cafe, and no, it turns out the most popular services were the most traditional ones.
100%.
That we do prayer book evensong, you know, Book of Common Prayer, 1660, anthems going beyond that, sometimes sung in Latin, full choir, no explanations.
Yeah.
No kind of cheesy little talks.
Yes.
Just this incredibly powerful. We have erred and strayed from the like lost sheep, you know. We have followed too much the devices and desires of our own hearts. Boy, a kid with an iPhone knows more about devices and desires than even Thomas Cranmer did, you know. But I think, why is this happening? And I think it's partly that generation of kids, like if they buy a new smartphone, it just, in the time that took them to walk home from the shop and unwrap it, the software is already obsolete. Like they have to upgrade it, you know, to the new version, whatever. And everything about their life is like that. And in that situation, you long for anything with permanence.
Stability.
You long for stability, you know. And when I can say to them, look, we've been doing this exact service for the last 400 years and we're just beginning to get it. I don't think we get it totally, but we'll get there, you know. There's headroom, there's growth room. You know, it's not, you know, if you get it straight away, then it's less than you are.
Yeah.
But if it's transcendent, it's got, you know, when I eventually returned to my Christian faith, you know, fairly thoroughly in my time as an undergraduate at Cambridge, and one of the things that held me back from it was a fear of intellectual suicide and a fear of stasis. There were some Christians in the kind of Christian going around saying like, here's exactly what you have to do. You have to find Jesus. You have to relive him. You say this prayer, then you're done. And you're right with God through the sacrificial blood of Jesus. And like, then you can carry on being a chartered accountant and need never trouble your mind again because you're fixed. And I thought, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I can remember, actually, I was just beginning to think there's more to this Christianity than I realized, because I was reading the Confessions of St. Augustine, and I got to this bit where he says, late have I loved you, beauty, always ancient, always, never always new. It hadn't occurred to me that you could call God beauty. And that although he was always ancient, he was always, I was just moving me. Then there's a knock on the door, right? And there's two ardent young, evangelical guys with a tract.
While you're reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they come in and lay it on the line and they say, you've got to believe this or you're going to go to hell, but thank God for Jesus, here it is, basically. And I'm going, is this the same thing as Augustine? I like And had those guys said, what are you reading? And I'd said, this is what I'm reading, amazing. And if they'd said, yeah, we too believe in that God, but they didn't do it. They had a set patter.
It's almost like this Western efficiency.
And it kind of put me off.
Yeah.
No, I did, thanks God, but it kind of delayed the moment. But eventually I got there.
We all have mobile phone service. It's time to support a phone company that supports us. Switch to our sponsor, Charity Mobile. They're different, they're proudly pro-life and impacting the culture of life in America. With Charity Mobile, there's no compromise on service, quality, or affordability. You get the same nationwide coverage as the major carriers with no contracts, and their customer service is staffed by pro-life Americans. Every month, they take a percentage of what you pay and send it directly to the pro-life, pro-family charity that you choose. Over the last 30 years, that's added up to millions of dollars, making a real difference. And all plans start under $50 before taxes and fees. When it comes to phone service, Charity Mobile makes it easier than ever to buy the way you believe. New customers can use my code MattFradd to get a free phone with every new line, plus free activation and free shipping. So it's pretty simple. Why not have your phone bill actually support what you believe in? Check out Charity Mobile and see for yourself. To get started, visit CharityMobile.com/MattFradd. That's CharityMobile.com/MattFradd and use promo code MattFradd at checkout. I'll never forget the first time I heard my baby's heartbeat on an ultrasound. It's a sound that changes you. It takes something abstract and makes it utterly real. In that moment, you realize this tiny life already has a rhythm, a soul, a heartbeat of its own. But some women never get that chance. On Mother's Day, while the world celebrates, they sit in silence, afraid, unsure, and alone. And that's where preborn comes in. I didn't know this, but apparently when a woman sees her baby and hears that beautiful heartbeat, she is twice as likely to choose life. Just $28 can provide one ultrasound. $28, that's less than $1 a day for a moment that can literally save a life. Or $140 helps 5 women see that life clearly. Preborn doesn't stop there. They walk with mums long after the decision with care, clothes, diapers, counseling, everything a new mother needs to feel supported. I remember being in that hospital room, like I said, seeing that ultrasound, hearing that heartbeat for the first time. You're somewhat removed as the father, certainly compared to my beautiful wife. And so that was just such a profound moment. This May, let's honor motherhood by helping mothers. Dial #250 and say the keyword baby, or go to preborn.com/pints. If you're a business owner, consider a larger gift, $1,000, $5,000 or more, to help sponsor an ultrasound machine for a clinic saving lives every single day. All gifts are tax deductible. Visit preborn.com/pints.
Here's one way I would imagine people could remember their mind, have their mind remembered.
Yeah.
I haven't read this before, so can I read 2 stanzas from your book?
Please do.
As I walked out one morning, all in the soft fine rain, it seemed as though a silver veil was shining over hill and vale, as though some lovely long-lost spell had made all new again. And through that shimmer in the air I seemed to hear a sound, as though a distant horn were blown, in some lost land that I had known, that seemed to speak from tree and stone and echo all around. And with the music came these words, "Poet, take up the tale, this land still keeps, in earth and water magic sleeps, and dryad sighs and naiad," is that how you say it?
Naiad weeps, yeah.
But you can lift the veil. I mean, God, I didn't know that I was about to read the answer to what we're talking about.
Well,
we're talking about isolation, cut off from culture and community,
and remembering,
take up the
tail. So there's a great bit at the end of C.S. Lewis's novel, That Hideous Strength, in which kind of Merlin recovers. There's a conversation between two of the characters where he says, something we may call Britain is always haunted by something we may call Logres. Now, Logres is the name for Arthur's kingdom. It's the Welsh name for Arthur's kingdom. And he says, we've heard better than we can do. And he says, don't you see it in everything English? We're a nation of poets, but we're a nation of shopkeepers. Behind every Arthur and Mordred, after every Milton a Cromwell, And he says, if we have an ass's head, we got it. But we've forgotten ourselves. We've forgotten who we are. We need to recover. So in that same prelude, a little bit later, that's the muse giving me my marching orders. I kind of riff on that, and it tells you what I'm trying to do. I'll just
tell me the page too.
Find it for you. So this is just the page after you were reading.
Okay.
So I talk about all the things I need to tell, and then I talk about reviving memory. And then I say this, but listen well before you start. Be still ere you begin. See through the surface roundabout, the noise, the rush, the fear, the doubt. Though modern Britain lies without, fair Logres lives within, and I'm playing on the word like, you may yet walk through Merlin's isle by oak and ash and thorn. The ancient hills do not forget, and you might wake their wisdom yet. Who knows what wonders might be met on this midsummer morn. So I have taken up the tale to tell it.
Thank you for taking up the tale.
So, I'm hoping that what comes,
so beautiful.
When Lewis had, of course, had read Tolkien had read bits of The Lord of the Rings to C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, could you imagine being in the room?
And at one point, Tolkien says in one of the lessons, for a while, C.S. Lewis was my only audience.
Wow.
It was the only. But when the book itself came out and Lewis reviewed it, he said, there's something so resonant in this story that it is continuously, he says this, it's not an allegory, but it's not an allegory in the fixed sense that Tolkien has a bunch of theories he wants you to get. He translates them into a story, and if you translate it back, you get exactly the same thing he thought of. That would be very tedious.
Yes.
But it's written at such a deeply resonant, almost baptized imaginative level that although not an allegory, this is Lewis's phrase now, he says it is continuously suggestive of incipient allegories. Passage after passage of that story gives us the story and the symbol and the image with which to get a hold of who we are and how we are and how to keep going. So, and the power of story, one of the most moving moments for me in the whole of the Lord of the Rings is, when Sam and Frodo are in Mordor, and there's still a whole way to go, and they're just outnumbered and exhausted, and the ring is getting heavier and heavier, and suddenly Sam starts reminding Bilbo of the great stories. So reminding Frodo of the Beren and Luthien, and they've been heroes, and he says all those people were in dark and desperate places as difficult as the one we're in now, but they didn't give up, and it wasn't the end of their story. And then he says, do you suppose we might be in a story, Mr. Frodo? And I'm going, I'm reading this as a teen. I'm going, yes, you are. I'm reading it. Don't worry, guys. It's not the end. This is my second read through. It's going to be, But the idea, of course, if you're a reader and a character in a story you're reading says, do you suppose we might be in a story? You've got to say, whoa. Do you suppose I might be in a story?
Someone reading about me?
Someone is telling my story. Mm-hmm. And that idea that, God is speaking us into being, and he's telling this great story of creation, fall, and redemption, and resurrection, and renewal, and himself is embodying and enacting it in Christ. And then he lets us not admire the hero from afar, but actually be part of the story, literally in Christ and Christ in us, That's an astonishing thing. And I think, for somebody who's felt they've fallen out of any ever good story there was, and that there's no connection, no thread in their life, no meaning to the random pattern of just stuff happening, to be told if you knew there is a story, and there's a great story I found about the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge when I was working on this big book on Coleridge called Mariner. So Coleridge, as a young student at Cambridge, was really caught up in the beginning of that resistance to slavery, that campaign against slavery, which had been started by a guy called Thomas Clarkson, also at Cambridge, who'd recruited William Wilberforce, who was part of this Clapham sect. So Wilberforce is the famous guy in that story because he was the guy who was a member of Parliament and did all the thing. But there were a lot of so Clarkson was the guy that really started the whole thing, and he's the one that did all the stats and went up and down the Channel ports and other ports of Britain and talked to the captains of the slaving trades and got the blood-stained manacles, and dropped them on the floor of the Houses of Parliament. Said we can't do this, and year after year it was rejected. Oh, slavery's an economic necessity. And there came a point where Thomas Clarkson kind of had a nervous breakdown. He just, is exhausted, giving up hope with the campaign, but giving up hope so his friends, clubbed together and hired a cottage for him in the Lake District to go and recuperate. Now, if you walk around the Lake District for long enough, you bump into Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So Clarkson bumps into Coleridge, right? And Coleridge is fanboying Clarkson. Oh my God, it's Thomas Clarkson, And Clarkson, actually confesses to Coleridge complete weariness, complete exhaustion. And then he says, well, he doesn't say it directly to Coleridge because these are Englishmen and they can't, what he does is he goes to his cottage and writes a letter to Coleridge in his cottage, So he writes to Coleridge and he says, it's not just that I'm losing faith in the campaign, I'm losing faith. And he says, I have no idea anymore of the divine. And Coleridge, who's just returned to faith in a really vivid and brilliant way, writes back to him and says, my dear Clarkson, don't worry in the least about whether you have any idea of the divine, but never forget that you are a divine idea. You were in the mind of Christ, in the mind of the Logos, as we all were, from the beginning of creation. He intends us. He waits for our moment in time. He loves us and wills us into being. He says we are all logoi from the Logos, we're little words. And he says, you're not only a divine idea, but the divine idea of Thomas Clarkson is being spoken into time now. And Christ, the Word, has not finished saying to the world what he wants to say through Thomas Clarkson. So Coleridge says, it's great, says, try not to become an impediment in the speech of Christ.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And, it heals Clarkson because suddenly he's not doing the heavy lifting anymore. He's not trying to make it all up and make it happen. And, so all of that entered into, when I started my sonnets on the sacred year, or liturgical sonnets, the first one was on the first of the great O antiphons, O Sapientia, which speaks of Christ as wisdom, O wisdom coming forth from the mouth of the Most High.
Yep.
Proceeding from one end of the universe to the other, rightly. That collect, that beautiful antiphon. So, I began that poem by going, I cannot think unless I have been thought, nor can I speak unless I have been spoken.
Come on.
I cannot teach except as I am taught, or break the bread except as I am broken.
Did you write that?
Yeah, I wrote this.
Bloody hell, you're a good writer.
O mind behind the mind through which I seek, O light within the light with which I see, O word beneath the words with which I speak, O founding, unfound wisdom, finding me.
Why aren't I finding your poetry in these bloody Barnes and Noble's bookstores? Well, poetry I find is quite awful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's kind of chopped prose, really.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and I find this is true in England as well, this sacred secular divide, which, is nonsense, is so ridiculous. So instead of putting me with poetry, because I'm a religious poet, even though I'm probably outselling the poets on it, they put me downstairs in the obscure, dusty basement with religion and spirituality.
Yeah.
Like it's like apartheid, that's separate over there. We have this.
Yeah.
I'm fighting to break that down, and I'm hoping, in a way, this
Come on,
is going to be, because everybody loves Arthur. And I loved Arthur before I was a Christian, and after I was a Christian, and in between, and the stories away. So I'm, because I'm published by Canterbury Press in England. It's, they're a great publisher, but, they're part of Hymns Ancient and Modern. Secular reviewers don't want to know.
Well, look, everyone go click the link and buy this book, just so we can outsell the bastards who are doing such a terrible job at poetry in Barnes & Noble. I will be.
Yeah.
Would you tell me a little bit, after you've lit your pipe there, a bit about the relationship between Tolkien and Lewis? Because people are fascinated with that, and I think they're fascinated with it because we are starved for true male friendship.
Yeah.
You even saw some debased people talking about the fact that maybe Frodo and Sam were homosexual because they couldn't imagine why two men would love each other.
That's reductivism. That's two kinds of reductivism. That's the kind of Freud speaking as kind of sex under everything and the unmust. But the other thing, this is a complete... not only do we medicalize everything, we sexualize everything. So the word intimacy is now a euphemism, right?
Yep.
Now, we've lost the way in which people can become incredibly close and deeply and intimate friends, and sex is not part of it at all. In fact, in my experience as a chaplain, I realized that not only, back in the day when it was reserved, sex was reserved as a final and full expression of real intimacy, between a couple, right? But now, obviously, it's, so I remember a student coming and talking to me about how she was growing to have a real feeling of, genuine, I think, love at a deep level, a kind of intimacy for someone, and they were both embarrassed by it. So instead of letting it develop, they had sex instead. Do you know what I mean? They had sex actually to
get rid of that.
To get rid of that and to physicalize it, and then, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, and there you are, it's gone. And instead of that being the final flowering of something growing, it's just used. So, sex now was the opposite. So now we just don't have a vocabulary. So if Frodo and Sam, or, two soldiers in the trenches, a lot of what's going on as Frodo and Sam go through that hardship is the young officer and his Batman or his subaltern on the Western Front, where Tolkien and Lewis were both officers in the trenches, and both, and Lewis was wounded, and Tolkien was, the whole description of the dead marshes with the bodies under it and the kind of waste in front of the gates of Mordor, that's part of his experience of war. And just to assume that, it's just risible, that whole thing. And we have to rediscover all kinds of loving, beautiful, tender, developed connection that's nothing to do with sex, and which sex would actually override and interrupt if it did happen, But, that's an almost forbidden thing to say.
But again, I think this interest in Lewis and Tolkien is partly this desire for true friendship.
So that friendship,
tell us a bit about them. I'm sure you know a great deal.
Lewis talks about how his friendship with Tolkien overthrew and overcame two prejudices in him that he brought with him that could have screwed it up. Yeah. So he's born in Belfast.
Right.
He's brought up in Ulster Protestantism. His dad and he had differences of opinion about whether there should be home rule or not. But they were grown up in a culture, admittedly there are historical reasons, but a culture which was hostile to and contemptuous of Catholics. Ulster Protestants in those days called Catholic nationalists bog trotters. And, the whole bog thing was to do with, of course, the Protestants had taken the best land, and so he comes with a certain amount of baggage, which occasionally shows through. And Tolkien once made about a joke, because Tolkien was really sad that Lewis didn't become a Roman Catholic, because Tolkien had so much to do with helping Lewis towards faith. But he said, perhaps that's a nice little joke. He said, perhaps there was an ulterior motive instead of an ulterior, Ulster.
Yes, good.
So Lewis comes with a kind of almost unreflected on, just a reflexive prejudice. Then within the controversies and kind of different camps of the study of English literature, there was a very sharp division in Oxford and in other places between the literature people and the language people. The language people thought people can read novels and poems all by themselves. They don't need a degree in Oxford to do it. A degree in Oxford should be hardcore learning about Anglo-Saxon vowel shifts and, the Icelandic origins of certain Danish words. That's proper learning, And so Tolkien was a Catholic and a language guy. And Lewis was a Protestant and a literature guy. So you would think, it's like 2 strikes and you're out. But I think, the Lord was at work here. But anyway, of course, what breaks the barrier is story and myth and legend. Lewis at this point, as he comes up to Oxford, is an atheist. He's teaching philosophy as well as literature, and he's kind of at the bleak end of the philosophical thing. But story, narrative, myth, poetry is his guilty pleasure. Like his philosophy can't attach. So you remember the famous quotation he says in Surprised by Joy, looking back at that time when he's first meeting Tolkien, he says, "The 2 hemispheres of my mind were in the sharpest contrast. On one side, a many-islanded sea of myth and poetry. On the other, a glib and shallow rationalism. Nearly everything I loved, I believed to be imaginary. Nearly everything I believed to be true, I thought grim and meaningless." And of course, it's the coming of Christ, the myth made history, and it's Tolkien who makes that point, that heals that. So what connects them is that Lewis hears that there's this thing called the coal biters, which is an Icelandic word for old men who hog the fire, who sit so close to the grate that they might even bite the coal, right? And Tolkien loved the Icelandic sagas so much that he was just willing to sit with anybody, and he would show them, he would recite it in Icelandic, so you'd hear that, and then everybody would just translate it, and he'd help them to do it. So it's like free Icelandic lessons plus the great sagas and all the Norse myths. And of course, Lewis just utterly loved the Norse myths. He said one of his great moments of joy was reading in Longfellow's translation of the Draper, I heard a voice cry, "Balder the Beautiful is dead," and just suddenly Lewis has lived. So he basically goes around to Tolkien's Coal Biters Club, like for the sake of the Icelandic myths, in spite of the fact that Tolkien is a linguist and a Catholic. But they bond over these beautiful stories. And he realizes Tolkien's love of this is as deep as his. And Tolkien suddenly realizes this guy, Lewis, really gets it. So a friendship begins to form. And then, Tolkien does an incredibly generous and in its own way quite a vulnerable thing, because Tolkien is secretly writing all the stuff that will become the Silmarillion and the Beren and Luthien. Like, nobody knows about this stuff. He started composing, and he basically shares a bit of his poem about Beren and Luthien and how deep that is, because he calls himself Beren and his wife Luthien. And he shows it to Lewis, and Lewis could have just, treated it with contempt or, whatever. It was such a weird thing for somebody to be doing, writing this song. But Lewis reads it, and he writes back beautifully, and he does it in a wonderful, playful way. He pretends that this is already a well-established, beautiful, ancient poem, and that he is the editor trying to just clarify some difficulties, So all his comments about the poetry are couched as this, and Tolkien loves it, of course, So then, they're able to talk about deeper things. And it's famously in September of 1931 when they've all gone round to Lewis's rooms, this time 3 of them, Lewis and Tolkien and Hugo Dyson, who's a great expert on Shakespeare and a Christian. So Dyson is an Anglican Christian. Tolkien is a very well-instructed Catholic Christian. And they're walking and they're talking about, they go out on Addison's Walk, and they're talking about their love of story and myth and how powerfully story seems to help integrate us and stuff, praising myth. And Lewis says, yeah, I love this stuff, but the problem is that these myths are untrue. They're lies, even though they're lies breathed through silver, says Lewis. And Tolkien just stops and says, they're not lies. And he later puts it in a poem he writes to Lewis. The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise. We make still by the law by which you're made. And he believes that there's an element of divine truth in in the great stories, and especially the stories that, you know, Lewis loves, which are all dying and rising God stories, as in Boulder. So they get onto the subject of, they talk about myth, and they get onto the subject of Christianity. And Lewis says, look, even if I was persuaded that, you know, okay, there's a guy called Jesus 2,000 years ago, he preaches some very good things, dies a hideous death. Even if I'm persuaded, which I might be, just on the basis of the subsequent reactions that he might have risen from the grave, well, bully for Jesus, you know, what difference does that make to me? Some guy 2,000 years ago, this happens to him, you know. And Tolkien is saying, Jack, I can't believe you just said that. You, of all people, know the power of the story of death and resurrection. You love it in Adonis. You love it in Balder the Beautiful. You love the story of Odin. You've even quoted it in one of your poems, that Odin hangs on the world tree in order to descend hell to try and find Balder. Come on, man. And he says, yeah, but they're just myths. And Tolkien says, can't you see that on this occasion, the myth has become history?
Yeah.
When we tell stories and make myths, we're sub-creators, we make it up. But the prime creator can take that story, which he was sending us in the first place, and make it absolutely true. So it satisfies not only the mythic, resonant, imaginative side of us, which is a very important side of being human, but it also satisfies the reason. It's actual. It's not just another made-up story. This time it happened, and it makes... And look at the way you've got the full resonance of, you know, the dying and rising and the grain of wheat falling into the ground, all that stuff. But then you've got, like, under Pontius Pilate, or while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Like, you know, like if... A couple of minor Roman officials get immortalized because they happen to be the apparatchiks signing the paper when the greatest story ever told becomes reality. And you can, as Tolkien is saying this, like you can see the two hemispheres of Lewis's mind, you know, quivering and coming together satisfactorily around the person and work of Christ. So, I mean, I think Tolkien did sort of secretly hope that, you know, he would become a Catholic. But in a way, he became an Anglican in such a way that kind of revivified and still revivifies and renews. Mm-hmm. So that's a really important thing. That doesn't mean that they don't have tensions. Mm-hmm. And they had real differences about, I mean, you know, Tolkien really didn't go for the Narnia thing.
Right.
Partly because Lewis just tossed these things off. Like he just wrote these classic books in, you know, in between, you know, exam papers. And, you know, Tolkien is meticulously working for years and years with 20 revisions. And Lewis is just writing it down with his dip pen and sending it to the press. Right. And also Tolkien wanted complete consistency in an inner consistency in a sub-created world, which of course he does magnificently. And he says, like, how can you have fawns and Father Christmas in the same story?
Right.
Now, Michael Ward, the great scholar, has answered that question for Lewis and talked about the imaginative and mythic unity based around the seven heavens in Dante of the seven Chronicles of Narnia. So Lewis was doing something deeper than... But, you know, I don't think there may have been a bit of jealousy there as well as, like, you know, Lord of the Rings hasn't quite taken off yet, whereas Narnia is an instant hit.
Is that? I didn't realize that.
You know,
okay.
So there's a bit of tension, but hey, there's tension in every friend. Mm-hmm. And some writers now big that up and go, oh, you know, they fell out with each other and everything, and that is not true.
Okay.
Like, we know that twice Tolkien, who was better connected than Lewis, had Lewis recommended for CBE and OBE and various honours, which Lewis declined because he actually felt... that he needed to be totally apolitical, and that to receive an honor from a government might be to be supposed to be in some sense in favor of it.
Yep.
And his views were too radical for sort of it. So they were looking after each other, and they, you know, Tolkien, I think, always had a place for Lewis, and Lewis a place for Tolkien, even where they disagreed. In fact, the nation of the Inklings is precisely that you could be really good friends and disagree. Yeah. And if there's something that they model in terms of male friendship, whatever now, I think that's the most important thing. I don't want to be in a silo. I don't want to just talk to people who have my view. You know, and one of the things about my poetry has been really fortunate is that I find my poetry is read by people on different sides of, you know. I was once asked to be a poet in residence for the two cities, as they're called, so the City of London, the City of Westminster, all the bishops, all the priests of this diocese. The Bishop of London was kind of having this thing, and of course, in a parish, if you're just a parish in a village, you've got to be there for everybody. You can't be too high or too low. But in London, in central London, you have like the super high Anglo-Catholic, and you have the evangelical where they're not even going to wear a dog collar, and you've got like super liberal, I just made this up last week, if it moves, affirm it. But you've also got super conservative, where like I entirely reject the century I live in, and I'm the curator of a museum, all that stuff.
Yes.
So the bishop told me that she, obviously as bishop, had to visit all these different churches, and she's thinking, like, what are these guys even? And she discovered that in these totally different churches, they all read my poetry.
Come on. Yeah.
They all used my poetry in the liturgy. So she said,
wow.
You've got to go and be poet in residence, because you're kind of So I am read by, and I'm willing to talk to, and I'm friends with, genuine friends with people who actually disagree with each other,
right,
fundamentally.
So dating today can be weird. You can feel like the only practicing Catholic in your city, and you start wondering, is everyone either hostile to the faith or just spiritual but not religious? Meanwhile, you would actually like to pray a rosary with someone, not just hope for the best together like everyone on mainstream dating apps. That's where our sponsor, Catholic Match, comes in. Catholic Match is the largest Catholic dating platform in the world, and I love what they're doing. It's an online community built for Catholics who actually care about the faith. Confession, the Eucharist, openness to life, building a family, all of it. You're not having the, so how do you feel about kids talk on date 3 with someone who's never even considered what the church teaches. On Catholic Match, you can filter by things that actually matter: mass attendance, devotion to the faith, openness to church teaching. Meet people who want marriage and understand it as a sacred vocation and not a situationship. Have real conversations about God and what a holy family might look like. Catholic Match puts you in a place where people are on the same page about Christ and His church, so you can find your forever. So if you're serious about finding a spouse who loves Jesus and His church, stop wasting your time scrolling past people who don't. Download the Catholic Match app on the Apple App Store or Google Play. It's free to sign up and only takes 5 minutes. Or go to catholicmatch.com to get started again. Visit catholicmatch.com and sign up today. As Catholics, we're called not just to believe, but to share our faith. The challenge, of course, is showing that it's a real encounter with Jesus rooted in Scripture and alive in our daily lives. And that's where our sponsor, the St. Paul Center, comes in. As a member, you'll get access to some of the best scripture and theology content online with Dr. Scott Hahn, Dr. John Bergsma, and other brilliant teachers who'll help you see how every page of scripture points to Christ. It's like discovering the Bible again for the first time. It comes alive in ways that deepen your love for the Lord and your confidence in sharing Him. Encounter Christ, share Christ. That's the mission. Obviously, it's very important to me. The whole point of Pints with Aquinas is to elevate really powerful voices who can communicate and defend the Holy Catholic faith. You can start your 30-day free trial today at stpaulcenter.com/pints, or just become an annual member right away. You'll love it. And when you do, they'll send you a free copy of the complete Ignatius Catholic Study Bible, which is, as you know, an incredible resource for anyone serious about growing in the faith. Again, just visit stpaulcenter.com/pints to start your 30-day free trial.
Sorry to derail you a little bit, but I need to ask you about Tom Bombadil, because everybody wants me to ask you about Tom Bombadil, who everybody loves. I want to ask you, like, who he was.
I didn't wear the blue jacket and the yellow boots.
Yeah. Why it was he wasn't depicted in the movies, and whether that was a good thing, and why it is you think that the ring had no power over him.
Yeah. So Bombadil is really interesting. I mean, Bombadil was a character in Tolkien's mind before he wrote The Lord of the Rings, and he'd written poems about Bombadil for his children. So he's this kind of almost the spirit of the earth itself. He's married to, if Goldberry is the river's daughter and she's everything, about the landscape of England that is flowing and fluid and beautiful, and that she gathers the marsh flowers, and Tom, with his boots and his feather, is the earth kind of bounding along. So there's something primal about them. They're more than themselves. At one point, we're told he's called oldest, and it's like he's the oldest of Middle Earth. He's kind of there before, and so I mean, there are some people who go so far as to say that he's almost a cipher for the divine, and that he's. But I think the ring has no power on him, because I mean, for me, Tom is an embodiment of the sheer goodness, the innocent goodness of God's creation, both in its ancientry and profundity, but also in its funniness and the chattering and chirping of birds and the weird way squirrels run. And, God has humor as well as joy and beauty. And I think he represents all of that. And if you think about it, God knows the controversies that are ripping through your country and mine and related indifferently. But, do you think the fallow deer care less? Who is president or prime minister, Do you suppose the chaffinches or the swallows or the sparrows in whose fall there is a special providence and for whom God cares really have an opinion on our culture wars? I think not. They continue in their kind of goodness and our struggles, they suffer because of our struggles, but they're not part of them. And even the War of the Ring, and even Sauron, and the last of the men of Numenor, and the alliance of the elves and the dwarves, vital as that is, kind of passes him by. And there's a kind of magic in his realm. So the question arises: why don't we just give him the ring?
Yeah,
like he picks up the ring, and he flips it. It's nothing to him.
That's right.
But because the ring is nothing to him, he wouldn't keep it. He wouldn't preserve it.
That's right. That's what Gandalf says.
But I tell you, one of the most brilliant little images in that hole when they show the ring to Tom Bombadil is, for a moment, just for fun, he lifts it up to his eye, and you get a bright blue, fecund, hospitable, friendly eye through a ring. And it is the thing of which the eye of fire, the eye of Sauron, is the demonic parody and the hideous,
Wow.
I mean, Tolkien is fully Augustinian in his theology of evil, so, which is clear from the Silmarillion, that everything is good to begin with.
That's right.
And evil, even the Melkor at the beginning, becomes Morgoth, is a twisting or bending awry of the primarily good. A thing has to be good before it can be evil. And even in its evil, it's still paying a weird kind of tribute to the good from which it fell, even in the act of parodying it.
Wow.
So, in a sense, having seen the terror of the fallen eye in a ring, just for a minute, you see sheer, pure, unfallen, innocent goodness looking out through the ring.
I'd never made that connection. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And how is it that he didn't disappear when he slipped it on?
Well, because it has no power over him, because he is prior. He's unique, he's single, he's the one of his kind, and he's prior to all the making of the rings. He's prior to the even the changing of the earth and the Kirk. So it has no grip on him.
And is this a similar answer you would give to the silly objection people give today? Why didn't the Eagles just carry them?
For God's sake, yeah. Well, I mean, it's of course the why didn't the Eagle? I wish to be courteous.
No, I want you
in
to
your country
roar.
in America.
No.
But it was an American. It was when they were first doing a film,
and I'm Australian, remember?
Oh,
so
right.
it'll be
So
fine. You can rip into them as far as I'm concerned.
So yeah. These recent tax evaders. Anyway, so the thing is, it was a misunderstanding in 1776. We just get the tax reforms in, we'll be fine. But. Actually, we had a launch of the book because I'm trying to write it in a way that is a recovery of memory of who we should be, both in my country and in this one. We had a launch in London in the Temple Church, and we had a launch in Washington just a few days ago in the National Press Club. And I did sort of say, because I realized with the 250, I said, I realized there was a little misunderstanding, but if Arthur had been on the throne instead of George, this would never have happened, But no, going yes, sorry, yes.
Very good.
Sorry, I missed our track.
No, that's okay. The Eagles.
Yeah, so the first idea of why don't we just use the Eagles?
Yeah.
Was actually in a film proposal that came to Tolkien in the 60s. And it was an American film proposal. It's written about by Humphrey Carpenter in a title called Cash or Kudos. Are you going to take the money and run for the first film proposal, or are you going to... So the proposal is to get rid of all the walking and just fly them from one place to another, like literally fly them, and then eventually you fly them into Mordor, and it's an aerial campaign. It was the beginning of, we can do this without boots on the ground. I don't think so. So, of course, this entirely misses the point of the novel, because the fellowship is built precisely in the pilgrimage. So, setting aside any plot hole you might think you have.
Which you don't.
Because
like you said, the deer don't care who's president, and the eagles have their own business.
Yeah, exactly. And also, you're just going to have the Nazguls coming out and attacking the eagles, because a big flight of eagles heading for Mount Doom
kind of conspicuous.
The eye is going to see them.
Mm-hmm.
They can be dealt with. The ring will fall to the ground. Some orc will pick it up. We're all toast. But the point about the hobbits is they're completely overlooked by everyone, except Gandalf, and that's the nature of Gandalf's wisdom. Gandalf is the wizard who notices the overlooked and the marginalized. And he tells Frodo that this is the time of the Shire, the hobbits will rise, and they will do what they must do while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. So the eagles are among the great as well, but the hobbits can kind of sneak through. But at a spiritual level, the point is that we are all fellow pilgrims. We are sojourn. Here we have no abiding city. I mean, Tolkien is a deeply, deeply Christian writer. And the beauty of The Lord of the Rings is he doesn't make any of it explicit. It's entirely in the structure, in the plot. It's embedded in the nature of the story itself. But one of the things he knows is that here we have no abiding city, that we are sojourners. And that's why in the end the elves have to go. That's why we finish with the great kind of voyage beyond the Grey Havens, where he's channeling actually Beowulf and things like that. We have the ship burial and the ship goes off, beyond the sundering seas. So there's that. And if you just flew everywhere, the testing, the trial, the experiences of hardship that make the bonds between brothers, would never have happened. And actually, the eternal things are precisely the friendships forged in that, not, the passing things. So there was every reason not to do it. But he does more. I mean, I think Tolkien is prophetic in lots of ways. But talk about Tolkien as a Christian for a moment, would you? So he knows all the world mythologies. He knows not just the Norse and Germanic ones. He knows it all. And he knows all the great quest stories. And almost all the great quest stories from Jason and the Argonauts onwards are quests to acquire a treasure, to acquire the golden fleece, to sail to go, to go to the garden of the Hesperides and acquire the golden apples, Prometheus to go and get fire from the heavens. It's all about getting something valuable and bringing it back and achieving kind of power in kingdom by acquiring the valuable. So he now comes in. What does he give us?
The opposite.
He gives us an epic of letting go, of renunciation.
The treasure is
of
right
weakness,
there in the beginning.
Yeah.
And
was there ever an age that needed that? We are literally, as that old book said, consuming ourselves to death. The sickness of our soul is precisely a sickness of perpetual acquisition and pouring stuff into a hole that will never be filled. And the way out of that is the way of renunciation. It's the way of letting go. So the entire story is about letting go. And then, of course, at a deeper level, obviously the great letting go of our story, the story that you and I, although we're in different churches, share, is that though he was found in form equal to God, he did not cling to equality with God, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. And then Christ's journey to the cross, the way of the cross, the Via Dolorosa. The cross is getting heavier and heavier. He falls 3 times. All of that is patterned into that last journey of Frodo with the ring getting heavier towards the Ring of Doom.
Why was it important, or what can we learn about the fact that the hero at the end becomes a traitor in a way? And then how...
And the traitor is the one who brings about the redemption. You remember when very frightened Frodo says to, in the Mines of Moria, when, they realize Gollum is following them, he says it's a pity that Bilbo didn't kill him while he had the chance. And Gandalf says, pity? It was pity that stayed his hand, My heart tells me that the fate of more of us, not least yourself, may depend upon the pity of Bilbo. And had he been, do not be, can you give life? Yeah. Should you deal death? Do not be eager to rush to judgment. Now, what's going on there's obviously there's an extraordinary story of grace. My strength is made perfect in weakness. There's a sense in which, even for Gollum, Gollum gets what he wants and then dies. But even for Gollum, there's a role and there's something redemptive. So here's like one of the most shocking and paradoxical statements about the passion and about the atonement comes in from Paul. I think it's in Colossians, where he says of Christ, he was made to be sin who knew no sin, that we might become the righteousness of God. Now, so, he takes on all the sin of the world and dies with it in order that we who are sinners should be liberated. And Frodo is not Jesus. He's not a perfect person, although he is the Christ figure in this respect. But he too needs to be saved. He too cannot effect his own salvation or that of anybody else. That the job is already. And there's something extraordinary about Frodo, who's like the best that a hobbit can be, and Gollum, who is the worst that a hobbit can be, has become so much that he's teetering on this edge, the good in us and the evil in us locked.
The good I want to do, I cannot do.
Yeah. And then the bit which is sin breaks free and falls away and is consumed in the flame. And this all happens on March the 25th, yesterday. And probably the most important day in the medieval calendar. We remember it now specifically as the Annunciation, as God doing this astonishing thing of becoming tiny and helpless for us in the womb of Our Lady. But the reason, because that day was so important, why did they pick that day? Why March the 25th? So one of the things is people had worked out, using, the moon and sun calculators and calendars and everything, they try to work out what actual date the crucifixion itself was in the year that it happened.
Okay.
And in terms of Passovers and when it happened, and they worked out it was March the 25th. So this is the day the world is redeemed. And then they just felt, shouldn't that also, if that's the day the work was achieved, and he says, tetelestai, it is finished.
Yep.
Should that not be the day he begins it? In the womb of Mary.
Yeah.
So they felt like March the 25th. And that's the only reason why December the 25th is Christmas Day. It's got nothing to do with all this kind of, neo-pagan, golly, what do the Romans call their festival? Saturnalia, it works that. And then, of course, somebody came up with the idea, one of these medieval, chroniclers, that March the 25th was the day the world was made. So it's the day the world is made, the day the God who made it enters into it, and the day he dies for it. So, of course, that's the day the ring goes to the fire.
What do you make of the fact that, Tolkien called this, a fundamentally Catholic work, and yet we don't find religion in the book?
No,
Which, thank goodness, because I think it would have come off rather...
And I think that was one of the reasons why he was a bit iffy about the Narnia. He thought, Lewis was being a bit too...
So how do you someone might say, how do you reconcile that? Okay, it's a fundamentally Catholic work, and yet there's nothing explicitly Christian about it.
There are a few... certainly not... Well, first of all, Tolkien, Middle-earth is not another planet.
Okay.
Okay, it's our world in a very much more ancient time.
Okay.
He's telling a pre-legend. So the great thing, the incarnation, has not happened. It's BC. But it's so BC, it's essentially going back, if you like, if you think of Numenor as Atlantis and the island that goes under. So it's kind of, pre-civilizations. And yet, Tolkien believes that Christianity is the central turning point of the cosmos, and everything before it anticipates it, and everything after it is utterly changed by it. Lewis took this idea up and brilliantly. I think Lewis's best apologetics essay is the one called The Grand Miracle, in which he speaks of the grand miracle as the entire event from the Annunciation to the Ascension. The whole Christ event is one grand miracle. And Lewis says, if there was a novel which everybody admitted was great, but was very very puzzling. It's a problem novel. It's brilliant. And somebody works out that the reason why we have difficulty making sense of it is that there's a missing chapter. And he said if everybody was going around as any claim to find the missing chapter, which lots of people might fake, you would have to put the missing chapter in the middle of the book. And suddenly you would say, oh, all that stuff in, the first 10 chapters, I get it now. And everything that follows, it would be the clue to both to the past and the future. And then he says, the Christ event is the missing chapter in the story of the cosmos, And I think, and it's absolutely true.
Beautiful.
It suddenly makes sense of everything, including all the so-called pre-Christian stuff. So you get anticipations, the idea of a king. Aragorn is another Christ type in that you meet him as Strider. He takes the form of a servant. He's a companion walking with us on the way, like he comes up without being recognized to those on the road to Emmaus. Why are your heart's so troubled within you, And he opens up the scriptures to them. He shows, gradually they realize this stranger, this ranger, this Strider is the king who is returning. This is the return of the king, and he is going to bring me. So the hidden king is a deeply, deeply Christian motif. And the more you read it with eyes open, the more there's something, certainly, if you think about Galadriel and the response, there's got to be something of Tolkien's deep devotion to Our Lady in the way he imagines Galadriel.
Absolutely.
And so it's there. Why is it not explicit? A, it would break the spell of that world.
Indeed.
Because none of this has happened yet. It's going to happen. But B, because, there's more to be done, I think, for making the case for Christianity by making it the hidden root of a story that blossoms fruitfully than by having to festoon every branch of your work with 5 proof texts and,
Very good.
just check it out, if I mention Jesus enough, it'll be published by the Christian press. No. You can tell the story at a profound level that renews people. But of course, once a person is or becomes a Christian and then they reread The Lord of the Rings, going, oh my goodness,
So it's a great preparation for Christian faith, maybe for those
that
aren't yet considering it. I wanted to ask you about the final paragraph here, because the final paragraph in The Return of the King, I remember the first time I read it to my kids, I finished it and I couldn't contain myself. I had to excuse myself, walked into my bedroom, walked into the closet, shut like 3 doors and wept.
Yeah.
I won't read much, but just the last kind of 3 sentences, and I'd love to get you to comment on it. But Sam turned to Bywater, and so came back up the hill as day was ending once more. And he went on, and there was yellow light, and a fire within, and the evening meal was ready. And this is the greatest line in any story I've ever read. You ready? Here it is.
Yeah.
And he was expected.
Yeah.
And Rose drew him in, and set him in his chair, and put little Eleanor upon his lap. He drew a deep breath. Well,
He said,
I'm back. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah, I'm back is just, it's partly a gentle riff back on the title of Bilbo's story, There and Back Again.
Yeah.
It's so good. And one of the things that seems to me that's about is you've had these high deeds of heroism. You've had the Battle of Helm's Deep. You've had the Battle of the Fields of Pelennor. But what is all that for?
To sit down with the wife and the kid in the fire.
Can sit with his daughter on his lap, and his wife beside him by the fire.
It reminds me of Chesterton's line about the soldier. That the soldier doesn't hate what's in front of him.
He loves what's behind him.
That's why he fights.
Yeah, no. So this is really important, and also, it's incredibly poignant for Tolkien because he came back. And so many of his friends, all his friends from school who were out there on the Western Front with him didn't. But they were all defending the Shire, and the responsibility he feels as one of the guys that came back. I mean, the attrition rate, particularly of, young officers on the Western Front. So I think he has to finish. In a way, of course, it's a beautifully circular thing because we finish where we began. We finish in the Shire. And you remember when Sam looked. This is all not in the film, but when Sam looks in the mirror, as well as Frodo, he's the one who sees the Shire being despoliated, and they're cutting down the trees on the road to Bywater, right? And he wants to rush away, straight away, and just go back, and that would be abandoning the quest. And Galadriel says, this may not happen to you, and he says, well, I'll take the long road home, or not at all, and you'll go with Frodo to the fire, So there's all of that. There's also, obviously, we now know that Tolkien was writing an Arthur poem, The Fall of Arthur, which we have now some fragments of, and which was published quite recently with notes. He knows the stuff. So the big shape of the Grail story, all the achievements, in the end, the Grail, the Galahad, who is the kind of achieves Grail, has to leave this world. And he goes, as it were, to Saras, to the holy city, and he goes, and Percival marries Blanchefleur and becomes the new Fisher King, and only Sir Bors comes back to Camelot to tell the story. And he tells the story in such a way that people's hearts are transformed by hearing it. But he says that actually they went out there to discover. Well, do you mind if I just? So Bors.
Your phone? Are you looking for? It's right there.
This is the book.
Oh, please.
So Bors is my kind of Sam Gamgee.
Okay.
And he kind of comes back at the end, cut to the chase, and he realizes that all this that they did in this journey out was really for everyone who was at home, that they would. So Bors starts to tell the story, and Arthur says, let the scribes take out their pens. This story isn't just for us. This is for children's children. And good Sir Bors took out his harp, and he took up the tale of all our hopes and fears, the tale that passes down the years, the quest of joy, the quest of tears, quest of the Holy Grail. And some who heard it were transformed and changed from deep within. For in the lifting of the veil, they saw the love of God prevail, and likewise felt another veil that lift from their heart within. For this I know, said good Sir Bors, we saw the Grail depart, yet it did not depart from us. For lovely and mysterious, its presence seemed to enter us. It shineth fair and glorious in the chapel of the heart. And now I know, in any church where people kneel and pray, and the good priest still sings the mass, there signs and wonders come to pass. The Holy Grail may come to us on any Sabbath day. So all of this stuff is to bring it. So it's two more verses.
Okay.
The Holy Grail may come to us on any Sabbath day. This tale, this is Bors still, is not for us alone, but for our children too. So take the tale up if you can, and pass it on to maid and man, that it may grow like living grain, both beautiful and true. And that's the end of Bors' speech. Yeah. Then I come back in as the poet, and I just have two things to say, two stanzas. And so the tale came down the years in every land and tongue, and old folk told it through their tears and gave it to the young. And even I, in these dark days, have heard and found it true. So I have taken up the tale and passed it on to you. And of course, we know that Sam writes all this down, and he's the one through whom the story comes.
Right.
But the story is, in the end, like the passion is for the good of mankind. He went to the cross for the joy that was set before him, not to kind of fetishize suffering. And in the end, it's to restore peace to the heart of ordinary people, that they may flourish. I've come that you may have life and life in all its fullness. There's a great poem about Christ by the Cornish poet Charles Causley, where it's called The Ballad of the Bread Man. There's a bit where it goes, he was charged with bringing the living to life.
Beautiful. Where can people, we'll put a link in the description to this book, but where can they get it? Is it? So,
depending on where you are, the official publication day was meant to be March the 23rd in both. I was pitching for March the 25th for obvious reasons.
Yes.
And that indeed was the publication day in England, where it's published by Canterbury Press. So right now it's available. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it from Canterbury Press. You should be able to ask for it in bookstores. It was meant to be the same day here. This is kind of an advanced copy. Now the day in USA and Canada is April the 20th.
Great.
But you can pre-order. The best place to do it is the Rabbit Room's own website. If you go like Rabbit Room, Merlin's Isle.
We'll make sure we link to that. Yeah.
You get it. And they've got these 2 editions. I mean, even the regular edition is beautiful hardback with all these incredible illustrations. But they've got another edition in a special slipcase. There were 500 of those we signed, but they sold out straight away. So, they've made it something that's going to last. This isn't like a paperback, read it and throw it.
May I have a look at this? Yeah. Haven't seen this copy. It is really beautiful. Thanks for making it beautiful. And thanks to Rabbit Room.
Yeah, and Stephen Krotz, who's a brilliant illustrator.
Very brilliant.
He and I made this pilgrimage together, or quest, you might say, because as I was revisiting all the sites as I was writing the poetry, and I thought, well, he's illustrating it. So we went to Glastonbury and we went down.
Cloth-bound hardcover too, just so people know,
And it's got beautiful end papers, and it's got a proper ribbon for keeping your place and all of that. Things that books, it's kind of like books used to be.
This is a beautiful illustration of you.
Yeah, he made that he did that as a woodcut and printed it. Yeah. So, I have the fuller version of that, me working on the poem as done by my illustrator.
How long did it take you to write this?
Well, quite a long time. I've been working on the kind of verse version of this for about 5 years, but I've been thinking about it for 20 years before that, and puzzling about how it might be done and making notes. But now I'm in the flow, right? I need time, I need to have block out weeks or 2 weeks. I have to read myself back in it and attune myself to the ballad rhythm and things. But I've now written volume 2 and I'm halfway through volume 3. So I'm kind of 2/3 of the way through the whole thing. So volume 2 comes out in November, and then there'll be just one a year after that to give me time.
Yeah.
There'll be one in 27, and then the final one will be in 28, which I'm hoping to finish it before I turn 70.
How old are you
I'm
now?
68 now.
Okay.
So, I got a couple of years to finish
Beautiful.
it.
What do you do for fun? So let's say you get back from this big grueling trip in the United States and you wake up jet lagged. What do you do?
Yeah, okay, I'm like Ratty in Wind in the Willows. I like simply messing about in boats. I have a little boat on the Norfolk Broads, on this little network of rivers and small lakes near where I live. She's an old-fashioned wooden sailing sloop, gaff rigged, lots of string to pull, and I just like sailing gently among the reeds and reed beds there. And there's something about the wind filling the sails. There's something about just being afloat. I leave everything behind, and so that's something that's really important for me. Obviously, as you'd expect, reading poetry is really important to me. I never get in. When you're writing, you sometimes think, wait, do I need to do more reading? So I have a lot of people will be familiar with my little study because it's where I welcome you every week for my spell in the library.
That study's not your hut. That's part of the home, yeah.
No, I've done 1 or 2 from my hut.
Okay.
So in the winter months and the colder months, I'm up in the study. But when I can, I write in the hut because there's no electric. Like the Wendell Berry, the great American poet, has a poem called "How to Be a Poet," which says, "Make a place to sit down. Sit down." It says, "Shun electric wire. Live a 3-dimensioned life." There are no unsacred places, only sacred places and desecrated places.
Very good.
So I walk down to my hut, and in the very act of walking down there, I'm getting myself ready to do this thing, and I sit there. I have a row of pipes. I have some very good English ale. I particularly like porters.
Yeah.
But among the bitters, I like Old Speckled Hen.
Oh, yeah, I do too.
I have some cigars. I have a malt somewhere. I've got a lot of the Arthur books, and I have nice old manuscript books, like really nice paper notebooks, well bound. And I have a fountain pen. And, writing poetry recreates me. It's not like, hey, I have to work hard as a poet. I need to be compensated for it. Now I'll go off and do something else. I mean, I'll write poetry for fun. But when I need to just not do anything else, I go out on my boat, or I sit in my garden, smoke a pipe. We got a long, thin garden, and my wife planted this beautiful bed of roses right in front of my writing hut. And she buys the roses for their names. So there's a rose there called Ancient Mariner. because I wrote a book on the Ancient Mariner, and
I love your wife already.
There's a rose there called the Poet's Wife. Oh, my wife is amazing.
Can you tell me about her and your relationship?
So
with her?
she's great. So I mean, I wouldn't be here doing this, if it weren't for her. She kind of keeps me rooted and grounded, and she's very good at rolling her eyes if any praise that she refers to as gushy comes rolling in. But she gently supports what I do. She's a brilliant woman in her own right. I mean, when I met her, she was tutor in doctrine at Westcott House Theological College in Cambridge. She had a first in theology as an undergraduate, and she had a doctorate in systematic theology. She's an expert on. She was looking at the theme of obedience and authority in the documents of Vatican II, and trying to work out whether there was a consistent theology there or not. And she was a deaconess in the local church. First time I met her, I literally was a preacher. I didn't know anything. I was stood outside the church, right, looking at the notices. I was trying to find a church, just moving into the bit of Cambridge, and they had the name of the preacher for like the following Sunday and the title of the sermon. So the name of the preacher was, Dr. Margaret Hutchison, and I'd never heard a woman preach; it just wasn't part of my experience. But the title of the sermon was "Stoned or Not." I thought it's got my name on it, So it was a great sermon, and it was about the difference between the man being stoned for gathering sticks on the Sabbath in Deuteronomy, and the woman taken in adultery, and Jesus is "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." It's an amazing sermon. So I sort of sat at her feet in that sense, and then we ran a youth group together. We had no youth group in that church, so she said, "Would you help me start?" And obviously, if two single Christians run a youth group together,
you're in trouble.
They may as well publish the banns of marriage themselves, because the youth group will otherwise, But it's great. So we married over 40 years ago. We married in 1984. But she never wanted. She was from my view, I was in awe. I was a high school teacher. She was, serious academic, but she's the one who saw that I had a book or two in me. She's the one that encouraged me to do the PhD, and she didn't want to be an academic. She wanted to be a parish priest. She wanted to just be the pastor of a place. She's got a great love of community. So when that became possible for her, after 1994, we swapped roles. And I went into sector ministry, into chaplaincy, and back into the university world, and started writing books and doing academically my life work, which is to defend the imagination as a truth-bearing faculty and try and overthrow the tyrannies of Cartesian dualism, plus writing poetry on the side. But meantime, she was building these beautiful communities, working with kind of young mothers, and she's retired from that now, so she's complete, but she still helps out.
What advice do you have for us married people? You've been married over 40 years. What have you learnt? What advice would you pass on?
Your wife is wiser than you are.
That's actually
always
true.
It is true. Yeah, I married up, as they say. But no, I think just exactly what we're talking about, the value of steady companionship. And when suffering comes and trials, which it always does, there's a fundamental decision to be made. Okay. Is this going to be a wedge that drives us apart, or is it going to be something that draws us together? And the dealing with it together, suffering with it together, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ, says Paul to all Christians. But it's especially true of marriage, I think. And there are burdens that I could never have carried alone in terms of stuff we've had to deal with, and burdens that she could have never carried alone in terms of stuff she's had to deal with. And so and when you've been through enough stuff together, it's almost kind of like the friendship of the trenches, So I found, curious enough, it's not, obviously it's great when things go really well and it's lovely and we have a great holiday together, but actually I think the thing that's deepened our intimacy in the deepest sense of that term is dealing with the losses and the bereavements and the misunderstandings and, your kids and all of that, So I don't know. I think. The fact that we're still married is probably more to do with her virtues than any of mine, and she's very patient and forgiving and very tenacious, which is a good thing to be.
Beautiful. What if we ended with you reading us a poem about the Blessed Mother?
Yeah.
Our tainted nature's solitary boast, as Wordsworth says.
I would love to do that. You know, I love the Feast of the Annunciation. I like all the Marian feasts. And I have a very good friend, a Roman Catholic friend, a guy called Sean. And he and another friend who's a medieval historian, but is an agnostic, we all go on pilgrimages together every year. And George is like the court jester undermining it. But Sean and I take rosaries and say the rosary. And I found it incredibly helpful. Now, as an Anglican, I'm not sure I can give you the entire theology of it. But when I was thinking about, you know, the Annunciation, I began to just look through all my different books and realized I'd written 5 sonnets, not about, but 5 sonnets to the Virgin Mary. And I thought, okay, I've just got to hold my hand up and say, that's how I roll. I know she's there. I love the Magnificat. It's true that every generation will call her blessed. And I'm one of the generations that does that. So this is a poem addressed directly to Our Lady, and I wrote it, you know, as it were, thinking of her on Christmas Eve. She's about to bear this child into the world, and she's had to keep him within, and she's taking on the swords that will pierce her heart, and she's doing it just as God so loved the world. But Mary didn't just so love Christ, she loved us, that through Christ. So this is addressed to her, and I call it Theotokos, so God-bearer. You bore for me the one who came to bless and bear for all and make the broken whole. You heard his call, and in your open yes, you spoke aloud for every living soul. O gracious Lady, child of your own child, whose mother love still calls the child in me, call me again, for I am lost, and wild waves surround me now. On this dark sea, shine as a star and call me to the shore. Open the door that all my sins would close and hold me in your garden. Let me share the prayer that folds the petals of the rose. Enfold me too in love's last mystery and bring me to the one you bore for me.
Amen.
Yeah, you know, some of my more Protestant brethren say, Malcolm, what are you doing that like? And I say, look, this poem begins and ends with Jesus. She bore the one for me. First thing Mary says, and just do what he says.
Yeah, and she magnifies it all.
You're not going to, you love Mary, you're not going to be far from Jesus, because she's going to say, check out my son.
Look at this, you think I'm good. I am.
You know. Anyway, sorry. But there's something beautiful about her.
Oh.
And I love those pictures of her where she's kind of enfolding.
Yeah. Can I read? You may have heard this. This is Chesterton. He says, there is never a crack in the ivory tower, nor hinge to groan in the house of gold, nor leaf on the rose in the wind to wither, and she grows young as the world grows old, a woman clothed with the sun returning, to clothe the sun when the sun is cold.
All that clothing. So one of the Stations of the Cross, of course, is Jesus meeting his mother. And when I decided I wanted to write on the Stations of the Cross, and I'm really delighted to know that there's quite a few Catholic churches that use my Stations of the Cross as well as Anglican ones, and the Dominicans up in. So I'm thinking about the two of them, and I suddenly thought about her looking at her son, and that connects her with. Oh, can I read you this one as well?
I'd love that.
Okay. This darker path into the heart of pain was also hers, whose love enfolded him in flesh and wove him in her womb. Again, the sword is piercing. She who cradled and gentled and protected her young son must stand and watch the cruelty that mars her maiden making. Waves of pain that stun and sicken pass across his face and hers as their eyes meet. Now she enfolds the world he loves in prayer. The mothers of the disappeared who know her pain, all bodies bowed and curled in desperation on this road of tears, all the grief-stricken in their last despair are folded in the mantle of her prayer.
I'm glad you exist, Malcolm. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you for smoking with me and drinking with me. This has been...
I can smoke, I can drink Lagavulin,
Yes.
I can talk
Who is
about
he? Doesn't
Tolkien
matter.
and
I'll
this.
come.
Yeah, like, what's not to like,
Glory to Jesus Christ. Well, thank you for your good work, and this has been an absolute delight. Thank you very much. I cannot believe you made it all the way to the end of this interview. The fact that you did shows me that you might enjoy a lot of the stuff that we do here at Pints with Aquinas. So please click subscribe, click the bell button. We really appreciate it.